He's Jason Tucker. I'm Steve Zehngut. I'm the founder of Zeek Interactive, and I run the OC WordPress meetup.
And y'all know who it is. It's your boy Jason Cosper, aka Fat Mullenweg, back in the building on the world's most influential WordPress podcast.
And with that podcast, go over to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, all those sorts of places, and leave us a review over there. We'd appreciate it. So when you go and push the unmute button and then it doesn't take,
technical difficulties, it happens.
Sure.
And we also didn't have the countdown, which didn't help either. So, hey, come on.
You know, it's fitting because we're talking about WordPress's technical difficulties today.
We are. Yep.
Yeah.
If you didn't hear me say it because I was muted, yeah, we are definitely talking about the WordPress database schema today. And what schema is Latin for cluster F, right? Is that what it is?
It feels that way.
I don't necessarily know if Steve has the Wikipedia page handy for what schema means, but I'm talking long enough to hope that he's catching my hint. And but
unfortunately, schema, when you just type it in, goes to schema.org. But a schema is a representation or plan of a plan or theory in the form of an outline or model. That's the definition of schema.
Sure. Yeah. Cluster F.
Oh boy. Yeah. So what kind of brought this on is obviously our previous conversations that we've had with WordPress and about how it's storing data in the database, and and how it's storing structured data inside of a structured database. So yeah, that's fun.
I think it's important to note first. I just put a link in the chat. This has the database diagram for WordPress in there. I don't think that diagram has ever changed. I think it's been that way for a long time. It may have changed in the first couple versions of WordPress, but the schema has not changed.
Some indexes have changed. They've added at least a few of those, fortunately, to help with query speed and stuff like that. But there have not been many modifications to the actual diagram.
So if you look at that chart, I'm specifically looking at, go down to the chart and zoom in on the bottom one, the bottom middle one.
Oop.
Yep, that's all right. WordPress, WP post meta.
Oh, this one's the smallest database. Smallest table in the database.
I'm not saying what is there.
Light of my life.
Why I gotta hate?
No, not why you gotta hate. I said light of my life. This is the thing that has kept me in business, that has kept me collecting paychecks off of WordPress for 17 years now.
And again, I know you said that there have been some modifications to this structure, to this diagram over the years. I get that, but that one spot hasn't changed at all, and the overall structure hasn't changed.
So I get this weird feeling that this database and database schema was only built to support a piece of blogging software.
What?
That's not an e-commerce solution?
That's crazy talk.
Not an LMS, not a whole social network, not forms, not come on guys, help me out here.
Oh, you name it. Pretty much, and anything that's on the web. I mean, 40% of the entire internet runs on WordPress now, right?
Yeah, and 40% of the internet's content is unnecessarily shoved into WP Post and WP Post Meta.
Well, and you mentioned it. You mentioned e-commerce, membership sites, LMS, Buddy Press, or social networking sites, right? All of that stuff, all of that data is shoved in that one little table at the bottom there, with very little structure to it. And as Cosper mentioned, no indexing.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that.
Oh, I didn't even put indexing anywhere in this description.
Well, I know this is the dev branch. Should we explain what indexing is?
Yeah, definitely go for it.
I know what it is. I'm gonna give this one over to Cosper because I know he's got a great definition for this.
Not really.
Okay.
No, I mean, basically, just like at the the back of the book, the glossary, you're looking for. Here's where any mention of an apple or whatever else you might have, whatever Steve was munching on at the beginning of this episode. You want to know where any mentions of that are. The index should, as long as it's constructed correctly, tell you. In the case of WordPress with posts and post meta, a lot of that stuff, indexes are created around IDs, post IDs, the GUID, things like that, where you kind of want to be able to quickly search, when you're, okay, I'm going to pull up a post page. You pull up the post page, that post has a post ID. The index then tells you in the post meta table, here are all of the places that the data corresponding to this post ID is stored. And I mean, the data was already in there, but there's an index in there so like for a quick lookup of like, okay, this is the data I need to pull for this scenario.
And so when you're talking about things like an LMS or e-commerce or BuddyPress or membership sites or any of these things, right? You're talking about some pretty complex queries, and you start to get your queries start to become complex pretty quickly on just something like an e-commerce site, right? Because you've got a whole bunch of data that you've got to join together and find to do lookups on, like a past orders or what a customer history or a user profile page or any of that stuff, right? As soon as you start to link two tables together and do these joins, that's the problem. If you're joining with an unindexed table, it then has to search through all of the rows in post meta, right? Because there's no indexes to find what you're looking for. And so, I have clients that have 500,000 orders stored in their WooCommerce database. And that it's actually, I know that sounds big, but it's not that uncommon, right? There's a lot of WooCommerce stores that sell a lot of product, and the orders rack up quickly, right? So when you have 500,000 orders and each order has 40 rows in the post meta table, you got problems. Because that's what's happening, right? So each of those posts is it's not just one, post meta row. It's a post meta row for all of the information that has to do with that, whatever that thing is.
And where it starts to get really fun is when you have a legacy site that you've had for even just 2 or 3 years, and a plugin that you start out with in the early days, you're like, oh man, like this is going to add some great functionality to the site. And when an order gets placed, something gets added to the meta row pertaining to that plugin, to the post meta, pertaining to that plugin, and then you've deleted the plugin. Guess what? That data is still there. In a lot of cases, there are some plugins that are pretty good about removing the data, but most aren't.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you end up having to do, we're getting close to spring, to having to do some spring cleaning on your database, and nobody does that. No.
And ACF is a plugin that we've talked about a lot, right? And we've mentioned a lot. ACF, it basically it has a way of storing data that is a good practice for the plugin, but terrible on post meta. So in ACF, everything that you store actually gets stored twice, right? It's once for the piece of data and once for the ACF, like to reference the ACF field that you used. And that's there for a couple of reasons. It's there so that their plugin is sort of future-proof, right? If you go and change that table or that field or edit that field, it sticks around, right? But ACF causes a lot of bloat in your post meta table. So if you add an ACF field to something like a product in WooCommerce, now not only do you have your 40 rows that WooCommerce has created, right? But let's say you have 10 ACF fields associated with them, and they each write double. You've now got 60 post meta rows for every single order.
Wow.
It adds. And
wow.
I'm not exaggerating. These are normal circumstances. These are things we do all the time, and it adds up really fast. Especially if you're talking about a site that needs a scale.
It does. Yeah. I will say, up until, I mean, it's only just been in the past few years, the way the drum that has been getting banged over and over again is do things the WordPress way. And doing things the WordPress way involves shoving stuff into post meta and posts. In the case of WooCommerce, this is something that we've mentioned on previous shows. When reviews get stored, and I think this was clever at the time, reviews are stored as comments. Because, I mean, if you're selling something, you know, a review is they're leaving a comment on the product.
Bring up the image again, Jason. Yep. Let's look at the comments section. So it's in like the top right.
Oops.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Right there.
Uh-huh.
On the right. Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, you know, it's storing the stuff in the comments. It's, you know, all of these things just kind of peppered throughout, you know, Salt Bay sprinkling it on the site. And I don't even know if that dude is like problematic or whatever.
Well,
but that's
well, and here's the problematic row there, right? So comment content is a type of the type is text. It's not a varchar, so it's not limiting you to the number of characters. It's just text, which is just as much text as you want thrown into that field, unindexed.
That's
same
fun.
thing if you go back and look at the post meta table. I think the meta value itself is text or long text.
yeah.
So again, just a big blob of unindexed data that's sitting there. Stay right here, Jason. I want to mention one more thing, is that the options table that's over there on the left. Again, option value is long text and it's unindexed. And so what I'm noticing now on some sites is they're actually using that table to just store a whole bunch of settings, whatever they are, just like a whole bunch of settings for your site just get dumped into one row in the options table. And I've seen stuff in there where that option value is bigger than the memory you've got available on the server. So just querying that one option or those settings actually either causes a slow query or a 503.
And it gets especially fun when the options table, say you have a site on shared hosting or a lesser managed WordPress host that doesn't have some sort of object caching in place. The transients for your site, WooCommerce sessions for your site, all get stored in options, something that is loaded on every page load, every dynamic page load in WordPress, from WP admin to anything on the front end. If, oh dear God, you aren't caching.
I think you're absolutely right. I think WooCommerce got smart in a recent version and pushed sessions into their own custom table.
Yes.
So they're not doing that anymore. But yes. You know, that Cosper's point is well taken. Is that that options table just gets loaded every time you load WordPress, every time you do an API query, every time you load GraphQL or excuse me, REST API, or do an AJAX call. Anything that's in options that is set to auto load loads.
Yep.
No matter what it is, whether it needs it or not, it just loads.
And it until the past few versions, there wasn't even a default index to for the auto load like feature. Basically, I know that there were several managed WordPress hosts that for 10 plus years were like, oh, we're going to make an auto load index just to make things load faster. So yeah, and Steve, you talked about how WooCommerce has gotten smart and started breaking away from the WordPress way and doing everything in the default tables for WordPress.
Mhm.
But I really have to give it up to Pippin back in the day. I know he wasn't necessarily the first, but Pippin of Pippin's plugins, of EDD, which was a fork of WooCommerce. I know that J-Trip, John James Jacoby, also they have EDD, if I recall correctly, I believe I do, was a fork of WooCommerce, and they said, hey, we don't want to store all this crap into WP Post meta, so we are going to make dedicated tables. And I mean, there was like a whole to do about it. You're not doing it the WordPress way. You're not doing it the way that it's suggested to do it. You know, one of the reasons they pushed the WordPress way so hard, and I know that I'm probably going to be stepping on some toes here when I say this, is because Automatic and WordPress.com has their WordPress VIP. They've expanded that out a little bit, where they allow you to add plugins to your installs on WordPress.com now. Doing things the WordPress way meant that they didn't have to worry about all of these additional tables to mess with. If everything stayed self-contained in the default WordPress tables, then it was nice and easy for their administrators to keep maintaining. Maybe but again, go on.
Maybe there should be a flag that you can put in your plugin that says WordPress.com compatible or not, right?
Ooh,
so you know,
on a marketing side of things,
developer, you know, this has its own tables. Sorry, go ahead, Cosper.
No, but I mean, the WordPress VIP sites back in the day had like, here are the approved plugins you can use, because they're doing things the WordPress way. They are doing things in a way that we expect and have basically like optimized for. But most people, even on a managed WordPress host, don't have the resources that Automatic has to basically optimize their hosting specifically for the kind of crappy way that all of this has been engineered. Like I said before, it's almost like this whole database schema has been set up for a piece of blogging software and not a more featured CMS.
Interesting how that works.
Weird.
Yeah.
Weird. So I think we've talked about all of the like all the places that, you know, all this data gets stored and unindexed and makes it kind of slow. But can you zoom out a little bit, Jason?
Yeah.
And we're staring at the schema here, which is cool. There are places where they actually got some things right. Right. I mean, I know we've been kind of negative, but if you go to the top right, you know, the whole way that they manage terms, term taxonomy, term meta, right? That's broken out into tables like I would design a database, right? And it's done that way so that thing is really scalable. And I have seen that some people are using taxonomies in a non-traditional way, right, to leverage a well-built, you know, part of the WordPress database. I'm trying to think offhand. WooCommerce, again, some things in WooCommerce they do the WordPress way, some things they don't. But WooCommerce does this when they're dealing with product types, right? So when you go to WooCommerce and you set something as either a simple product, a variable product, or if you install subscriptions and set a simple subscription or a variable subscription, or those product types, right? Those types are all leveraging this part of the database, right? So they you know, that stuff is pretty well indexed and well formed, and it works. I'm only giving one example because I can't think of others right now, but I've seen others do this same thing. So props to the terms tables.
Well, I mean, it was a number of years ago, but it was fairly far along into the project where the people who were maintaining terms kind of did a little bit of an overhaul on things and tried to make it a little bit more efficient. So I just wish that forethought and everything else could be put into post and post meta. But of course, one of the edicts of WordPress is to not break backwards compatibility, even though they're kind of doing that right now with Gutenberg, sort of.
You can add on or you can add on whole new tables to this database schema, right? Yeah. Without breaking backwards compatibility, right?
Absolutely.
You could keep post meta the way it is as a table so that it supports backwards compatibility, and have a whole new set of tables to be like a new post meta schema that won't interrupt that. Right? You can have them living side by side. So I gave the props, but let's go back to the bad. If you scroll up to the top right again, we talked about post meta, we talked about options. User meta is the exact same way, right? So if you're running a BuddyPress site with thousands of users, or you have a subscription site, right, where you've got tens of thousands of users, you've got the same meta problem, because those kinds of sites will turn on like a profile page, right? And each of those profile items becomes a piece of user meta. Right. So if you've got, say, just a basic profile with 20 things on it, right? Mm-hmm. Your user meta is normally like 10 to 20 items, maybe more. Maybe it's more like 30 because of what's in the normal user page inside of WordPress. You add on the 20, now you got 50 per user, right? So you've got tens of thousands of users. You've got a scalability problem, and it starts to slow because it's the exact same problem as post meta.
And then there's stuff like that plugin post to post, where you could literally like make a post be in a relationship with another post, or a user as a term. Like you can start really weaving these things together pretty quick and crazy.
Well, I will say whenever post to post gets involved and you try to force two posts into a relationship, the relationship status normally ends up in it's complicated.
It gets fun when you start to add things like even in the WordPress dashboard, like a pull down menu to assign an author to a post. Right? There's what's that? There's a plugin. Well, authors by itself is built into WordPress, but you've got a plugin like multiple authors. If you want to add multiple authors to a post, if you've got 10,000 users and they're all dumping into this pull down menu, forget it. It's never going to load because it's got to go and it's basically querying all this data, right? It's also a problem if you get specific on a piece of post meta with who you want to filter into the pull down menu or filter into a system, right? That's where things start to really get slow in your dashboard. And plugin like ACF or what's that other MetaBox plugin that's popular? There's another one that I've been seeing crop up a lot. But those things allow you to create these types of interfaces in your dashboard without taking into consideration some of these scalability issues.
Also, something I was listening to Post Status, one of their live Twitter sessions, and they were talking about admin notifications. At the users in your database, when they are, in user meta, this is something that gets stored in user meta. When you dismiss an admin notification, that gets stored as part of your, like, okay, they saw this, they've actually clicked and like shut it down. So you have plugins that are adding all of these additional things, and they have an admin notification. They're helping with that user meta bloat.
Just add more on there.
Yeah. Keep it on.
I have seen some hosts, sometimes they will actually change the database. They'll change post meta and user meta and make it a different type of field and add indexing on it, which is a good thought. right? But once you start to limit those fields or add indexing, you're taking away some of the space that these long text things allow, and so overall, it's you may hit some limitations when you do that. But I have seen people try to solve some of these problems just for the sake of their own servers by adding some indexes in where they don't normally belong.
What are some of those indexes that you add first when regardless of what project you're working on, but you're just like, this is what I always add?
I don't mess with any of the core stuff inside of the database. What I'll do is a lot of the times, if I know that there's going to be a lot of information somewhere, I'll just create my own custom table inside of the WordPress database and store it there, and store it in a way where I know I can index it and we can get there faster. In addition to that, I've created some of my own indexing tables to kind of work side by side with some of these tables. Again, just to make searching for certain information for that particular site faster. And again, I've been dealing with this stuff for so long. I know exactly where the slowdowns are going to happen.
Right.
Unfortunately, most people aren't us on this call, and they just all they know is that this stuff. What the result is WordPress is slow, right? That's what they feel, and that's not exactly accurate.
I mean, just like you, Steve, I have, it's probably like, at this point, 20 different indexes that I can strategically deploy on kind of some of these more like legacy sites that have a lot of cruft, like an index around post ID, the meta key and meta value for post meta that boosts the speed of queries pertaining to those specific values. Even just alongside that, one that does one for an index for meta key and meta value for, again, the queries that just focus on that. It's really about knowing what some of these like common queries are, especially on kind of, like I said, legacy sites, on sites that have built up enough crap in the database over the years that you're like, okay, they might need a little bit of something in post meta. They might need a little bit of something even in term meta that can make things a little bit faster.
Yep.
Well, we usually come up with an idea for the next show's topic based off of what we got here. Are we treading into the waters of an installation and removing some of this cruft that's in there? Is that something that you guys are interested in exploring?
I was just going to suggest that you call the next episode Cruft.
Cruft.
I'm down.
Perfect. All right. Well, that sounds good. Oh, man. Well, it was, as always, good hanging out with you folks.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for hanging out. Cosper, before we go, could you tell folks where they could watch your session coming up here?
Yeah. So I am going to be in just a little over a couple hours from now, if you're watching this live, at WordFest Live, talking about my past 10 years of working remotely. The talk's titled My Decade in Pajamas. And if you go to wordfest.live, you can register there, sign up, hang out in the chat. They're doing a little bit of a Q&A after, but I have got a crap ton of little bits of advice that I've learned. So if you found yourself suddenly working remotely during the pandemic and are like, hey, I don't want to go back to an office, I will give you some tips around setting some guardrails in your life so you can actually separate your work life, your work from home life, from your home life.
That's awesome.
That's great. I'm just curious what brand bunny slippers you're using, so we will find out.
I'll put a link. Yeah.
Link in the description. Yep. All right, folks. We have a good one. Talk to y'all later. Here's our outro. Hey, look, the mute button worked this time. Go over to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and YouTube, where you can go and hang out with us and listen to us as a podcast. This is Dev Branch. This is our developer show we do once a month, and we do this in the first week of the month, but we also do WPwatercooler on all those other weeks. Go check it out. Bye-bye.